So let's go over how to, in our game, we have it thus working so far as the hero is moving back and forth across the screen following the mouse. And now we'd like to add the functionality of when we click the mouse, a bullet appearing where our hero is located on the screen, and that bullet moves up the screen in a negative Y direction, and when it hits an alien ship, it makes that alien ship play the explode sequence and then be removed from our game. So in order to do that, make sure that you have your enemy class set up correctly. Okay. So we've already created our enemy class. We've created our constructor so it starts in the given XY position. You're going to have to create this function called move down a bit. Okay. And the last function that you will create is this explode function. This explode function is inside of our enemy class, and it just tells the timeline for our enemy to go to and play where we've labeled our timeline explode. So remember, back inside of our Voider game, for our enemy object, inside of his timeline, there's a label called explode. So when I tell my enemy to explode, it'll go to this point in its timeline and play the explosion sequence. And at the end of the explosion sequence, our enemy is gone or disappeared from the timeline. So I've deleted him. Okay. And the way that I've deleted him is I say, inside of my timeline, at the end of the explosion sequence, I say my alpha equals 0, which means you're transparent. Your width equals 0, and your height equals 0. And by doing that, I make my enemy pretty much disappear from the stage. Okay. And this is the way that we did that. Alright, let's go back to our Voider game now. So in order to have our bullets move up the screen, we're going to create a vector of bullet objects. So let's look at our bullet. Okay, our bullet object is a movie clip object. It's connected to a class file called bullet. And let's look at that class file. We need to write this class file bullet. So bullet will be a .as file. It'll be a new .as file. You're going to save this .as file in the same file folder as our voider.fla file. Our bullet.as file is going to be based off a movie clip object, namely our bullet object. So we need to import our movie clip library so we can use all the functionality of a movie clip. We also need to tell our compiler that we are extending from the movie clip class. Next thing was we'll make our constructor. Our constructor, remember, has the same name as our class. Our constructor is going to take in two parameters of type number. And these two parameters will be our starting X position and our starting Y positions. So inside of our constructor, we'll just set the X and Y properties of our bullet object to where we want it to appear on our stage. Inside of our bullet class, we're also going to have a function called move up a bit. This move up a bit function is going to change the position of our bullet by subtracting an increment value from our Y. Remember that our stage Y equals 0 is up here and Y equals 400 is down here. So by subtracting from our Y, we're actually making the bullets rise up the stage. So create this move a bit function. It needs to have no return type. It just needs to change that Y value. Alright, so back in our voider game.as file, is where we're going to create our vector of bullets. We're going to create a vector of bullets so that we can keep track of our bullet objects and see when they hit an enemy object. So we're going to create an instance variable of a bullet vector. So we use the word public var, the name of my bullets vector I named bullets. He's of type vector, and by declaring his type here, we're going to make our vector work a lot faster, which is important in a game like this. So we say vector dot less than symbol bullet greater than symbol. So that way we know that, hey, this vector is only going to contain bullet objects. So we declare our vector up here outside of our constructor. But within our constructor, so inside of our constructor for our Avoider game, we are going to create that new bullets vector. Here's where we instantiate him. So we use the new operator. We say, hey, you're going to be a new vector of bullet objects. And now he's ready to go. Now in order for us to shoot, when we click the mouse, we're going to add an event listener. So right under where we've instantiated this bullets vector, you might see this new code here, and it says stage.add event listener of a mouse click, and when you hear that mouse click, call the shoot function. Okay? Our shoot function is where we're going to make new bullets. So add this event listener inside of the constructor, and then you're going to write that shoot function. The shoot function looks like this. Very simple function. Okay. It has to take in that mouse event so that it can be a listener event. It returns type void. It doesn't need to return anything. And here's where we make a new bullet. So we say var bullet. He's of type bullet. We use the new operator. We call that bullet constructor. And where we want that bullet to appear is where our hero is on the screen. So we can figure out where our hero is on the screen by looking at the kid.x position and our kid.y position. This is our hero's position. So that way the bullet will appear where our hero is, so it'll look like he's creating the bullet. Next thing we need to do is tell our bullets vector to push that bullet into his vector self. And then we add that bullet to the stage. Okay. You should test your code at this point. Okay, run your code, and when you click the mouse, a bullet should appear where the hero is at that point, and it will be pushed into that vector array. The bullet will not move at this point, but it should appear on your stage. So test that and come back. Alright, so you've tested it, you know the bullet appears where your hero is. And now let's see how to make that bullet move up the screen. So we want the bullet to move up the screen by listening to our timer. So remember that you had that game timer. Every 50 milliseconds he went off, and he would call the move function. So inside of this move function is where we're going to tell our bullets to move up the screen. And we're going to use a for each loop for that. So we say for each bull, which is a bullet object, in our bullets vector, okay, we just say for each of those, go ahead and call the move up a bit function. Remember that move up a bit was a function of our bullet object. So it was the function that we wrote over here inside of our bullet class. So our bullet objects need to call that function, and when they do, that function acts upon that bullet object and changes his Y value by 7.5 pixels, so it moves 7.5 pixels up the screen. Okay. You should test your game again at this point. Okay, so for every 50 milliseconds, remember that this is inside of that move function that executes every 50 milliseconds. So for every 50 milliseconds, we're going to go through that entire vector array, of bullets, and each bullet moves up a bit on the screen. After you test it, come back here, and we'll see how to make our enemies explode. Alright, to make the enemies explode, we're going to use 2 for loops. The first for loop is going to go through our entire army. So it's going to look at every single enemy object. For every single enemy object, we're going to look at every single bullet object. So we have another for loop. This for loop is going to increment or help us increment through our bullets vector. Okay. So remember that for every army object, you have to look at every single bullet object. Okay. Now here's where our checking happens. So we say if whatever bullet we're on, so we use that I, remember that we're using I in our inner loop, so we use I as our index for our bullets. We call this function here hit test object. This hit test object function is a function of our movie clip class. It tests to see if the bounding box of our first object, which is of type bullet, is touching the bounding box of our second object, which is of type enemy. If those 2 bounding boxes are touching, this returns true, which means that a bullet has hit an enemy. If this is true, then we want to do a few things. Okay? The first thing we want to do is explode our enemy. Okay? Right. Let's get rid of this code here. So when we explode our enemy, we tell that enemy object to explode. And remember that this function was the function that we wrote in our enemy class. So this is our class enemy. And when we tell it to explode, we're telling it, hey, go to and play explode on your timeline. Okay. Which remember, if you have it set up correctly, inside of your enemy object, inside of his timeline, you have a frame labeled explode, and inside of that frame is, not inside of that frame, after that frame is your explode sequence. So when we tell it to go to and play explode, it goes to and plays this sequence here. Okay. At the end of that explode sequence, actually this is sort of important, at the end of this explode sequence I've added some ActionScript code. So remember, this is at the very end of our explode sequence. And this ActionScript code here tells my enemy ship to disappear. And the way that it does that is it changes its alpha transparency to 0, which makes it gone from the screen. And it changes the width and height to 0 so that it can't hit my hero anymore. Okay, so that was put right on the timeline here. Okay, back to our avoider game. Okay, so we've told it to explode. Next thing we need to do is remove it from the stage. So we say remove bullets from the stage so they can't keep hitting other aliens. Then we need to remove the bullets from the vector. Remember that we use the splice function to do that. We tell it at the ith position, which is where our bullet is, remove one item, so it removes that bullet from our vector. And we do the same thing to our army vector, as we remove the enemy object that's located at J, and we remove just him from that vector. Okay. And that should make your enemies explode. So go ahead and test it. When you click the mouse, remember what's happening. So when you click the mouse, remember what happens. You added an event listener. It calls the shoot function. The shoot function creates that new bullet. Okay. It makes the new bullet appear where the kid is on the screen, so the kid's X and Y position. is fed to the bullet constructor. The bullet constructor creates the new bullet at the X and Y position of the kid. He's pushed onto the array and added to the screen. And so inside of our array, every time we reach a bullet inside of our vector, we move him up the screen inside of our 50 millisecond tick function. And then we check to see if that bullet ever touches any of our alien ships, and if it does, we remove the bullet from the screen and from the vector. So hopefully this all made sense.